Good evening, everyone. Last time we left off, we were in the book of Numbers, and we have the Israelites are trying to get into the Holy Land, and we had them the rebellion of Korah, and we've had them God finally, after 10 specific rebellions, God said, fine, if you want to die in the desert, after they asked for it, he said, fine, this generation is going to die off in the desert. And actually, so in this one, we now are going to see the transition from that first generation to the second generation. So this generation that left Egypt, and now we have that in that 40-year period, that generation that's going to enter the Holy Land. And there's going to be some parallels, both good and bad, between the two. And so that's where we're going to pick up. So we are going to start on 20:14, and in the passage from Edom. So Edom is the section right below what we think of as Israel. So it's the most direct path, and it's more of drier, and it's less hospitable. And it's actually the region where, now if I got to get the, Isaac's brother, Esau, settled. So they're actually like kind of distant cousins to a certain extent. So this is the land where they settled. And so they're supposed to get passage through here, and they don't. And not only do they not, but Edom says, no, you can't come. And Moses says, come on, just let us through. And so I'm going to pick up on 20:18. But Edom said to him, you shall not pass through, or we will come out with the sword against you. The Israelites said to him, we will stay on the highway, and if we drink from your water, we or our livestock, and then we will pay for it. It is only a small matter. Just let us pass through on foot. But he said, you shall not pass through. And Edom came out against them with a large force, heavily armed. But Edom refused to give Israel passage through their territory. So Israel turned away from them. So what this means is that they have to now take the long way around. So they're going to end up going on the other side of Jordan and cross over into the Holy Land through Jordan. And so this is kind of a little bit of, okay, you're trying to take the shortcut, but I already told you you're going to have to wait a little while. So now they're going to have to wait and take the more difficult path because they haven't been as consistent as they should have been. Following that, we have the death of Aaron. Then they set out from Kadesh, and the Israelites, the whole congregation, came to Mount Hor. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron at Mount Hor on the border of the land of Edom, let Aaron be gathered to his people, for he shall not enter the land I have given to the Israelites, because you rebelled against me. Command at the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and his son Eleazar, and bring them up Mount Hor. Strip Aaron of his vestments, and put them on his son Eleazar. But Aaron shall be gathered to his people, and shall die there. Moses did as the Lord had commanded. They went up Mount Hor at the sight of the whole congregation. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments, and put them on his son Eleazar. And Aaron died there on top of the mountain. Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. When all the congregation saw that Aaron had died, all the house of Israel mourned for Aaron for 30 days. So this is that generational transfer. So we've now seen it. So Aaron is passing away. And before they enter, that all generation, except for Caleb, who we saw has already stood up for the Lord in a good, strong way, will die off, and Joshua, but he's kind of already of the second generation because he was younger. And so this is that transfer. And we're actually now seeing how the Levite priesthood will transfer from father to son, and how they'll continue this on. So it's that transferring moment. Chapter 21. When the Canaanite, the king of Arad, who lived in the Negeb, heard that Israel was coming by the way of Anthiam, he fought against Israel and took some of them captive. Then Israel made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed give this people into our hands, then we will utterly destroy their towns. The Lord listened to the voice of Israel and handed over the Canaanites, and they utterly destroyed them and their towns, so that the place was called Hormah. from Mount Hor they set out on their way to the Red Sea, so to go around the land of Edom. This is not the same Red Sea as before. This is the Dead Sea. So to go around, you have to go around the Dead Sea and up there. So this is not the same Red Sea. This is the Dead Sea. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? Doesn't this sound familiar? For there is no food and nor water, and we detest this miserable food. Then the Lord sent poisonous serpents among the people, and they bit the people, so that many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We have sinned by seeking against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord and take away the serpents from us." So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said to Moses, "Make a poisonous serpent and set it on a pole, and everyone who is bitten shall look at it and live." So Moses made a serpent of bronze and put it upon a pole, and whenever a serpent bit someone, that person would look at the serpent of bronze and live. So this is one of those kind of loaded ones. There's a lot of loaded imagery, and even though it's a short story, there's a lot here. So first of all, yeah, they grumble again, but we have actually seen a little bit of growth. That when God sends the snakes, they actually realize they've done something wrong. That's actually a big step. And we shouldn't minimize the fact that they've realized that they've sinned, and they come to Moses. Moses doesn't go to them. They go to Moses and say, "We've done wrong. We need to reconcile. How do we reconcile?" Okay, another interesting point is, this is another case where they're allowed to use images. So they make a bronze serpent. Okay, so another instance where we're not confusing this with an idol. Ironically, later on, after Israel has formed as a country, this will end up becoming an idol, and it'll be destroyed by, I forget which king, because it becomes an idol and they start worshiping it in an unholy way. But at this point, the people recognize that this isn't an idol, that this isn't the thing that's curing us, because it's the same symbol as the snakes that are biting them. Of course, the snake is a symbol for sin in this culture. That's why snakes are never a good thing in most of Western cultures. And so again, this goes back to Genesis and the problem of the snake. And so when they're nailing the snake to the pole, it is killing sin. That's what that's symbolizing. So you're killing the snake in the same way you're killing sin. And of course, Jesus himself will point this out as an allusion to himself, that just as the serpent was raised in the desert, so too the Son of Man will be raised for the forgiveness of sins. And so this is that playing up again, that lifting up on the staff, the sin offering, and again putting something in their place. So there's a lot going on here, and it's that, but it's actually a nice little story. Okay, then we continue on the journey. So now this is Moab, and Moab is on the other side of Israel. So this is now they're journeying through here, and they're now on the other side. And they're in their final stages, and in these last couple of years, the timeline isn't exactly clear how long they're here, but they're actually not moving around as much. They're just kind of camped on the other side. And the next time, we're not going to read all of this, but we have two big battles with Sihon and Og. And these are important, at least because they end up in the Psalms, and these become very symbolic of God defending them, and it's kind of a prelude to the conquest of the Holy Land, because Joshua leads the armies, and they conquer them, and they're able to defeat them. And it actually then leads into the other one. So we're now starting to realize and do what we're supposed to do in the right way, because we're fighting our battles in a holy way, and we're defeating our enemies. And Sihon and Og come up, and they're symbolic. You'll see them come up in the Psalm. So I see them. We defeated Sihon and Og, the king of Bashan. And so I know these names a lot because they're in the Psalms. Next, we have the case of Balak and Balaam. And this is a long section, but it's an interesting one. So Balaam is an oracle, a seer, a mage, whatever, a priest. All these kind of things kind of rolled into one, and he's from the other land. And so, the people against Israel are realizing, we couldn't they defeated Og, and they defeated Sihon, and so we can't defeat them that way. Well, let's curse them. Let's try to curse them. And so we have this interesting case of Balaam, and he has one case where his donkey talks to him, and that's an interesting one. But we also have the case of Balaam trying to curse them. So Balak, the king, is going to pay him to curse him, and they can't. No matter how hard he tries 4 times, and each time, instead of cursing them, he blesses them. So it's showing the superiority of God. It's also showing that God works outside of Israel, that even though Israel is his chosen people, he exists and influences the world outside of it as well, which is an interesting one. So we have these 4 ones, and it actually calls back to the blessings and the promises of Abraham, because it's going back and saying they will be, instead of cursing them and saying you're shriveling up and dying, he has ones that says you will be blessed, you will multiply, you will prosper in the land. So it's going back to the promises that God gave Abraham, and now he's reaffirming these in an interesting way through this foreign soothsayer. Okay. We're going to go to 25. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the people began to have sexual relations with the women of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifice of their gods, and the peoples ate and bowed down to their gods. Thus Israel yoked itself to the Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger was kindled. Against Israel, the Lord said to Moses, "Take all the chiefs of your people and impale them in the sun before the Lord, in order that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel." And Moses said to the judges of Israel, "Each of you shall kill any of your people who have yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor." Just then one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman into his family in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the whole congregation of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he got up and left the congregation. Taking a spear in his hand, he went after the Israelite man into the tent and pierced the 2 of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly, so that the plague was stopped among the people of Israel. Nevertheless, those that died by the plague were 24,000. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by manifesting such zeal among them on my behalf, that in my jealousy I did not consume the Israelites. Therefore say, I hereby grant him my covenant of peace. It shall be for him and for his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the Israelites." The name of the slain Israelite man who was killed with a Midianite woman was Zimri, son of Salu, head of an ancestral house belonging to the Simeonites. The name of the Midianite woman who was killed was Cosbi, daughter of Zur, who was the head of a clan in the ancestral house of Midian. The Lord said to Moses, "Harass the Midianites and defeat them, for they have harassed you by the trickery with which they deceived you in the affair of Peor and in the affair of Cosbi, and the daughter of the leader of the Midianites, their sister. She was killed on that day of the plague that resulted from Peor." So, we saw them first, they tried to fight Israel, that failed. Then they tried to curse Israel, that failed. Okay, well, let's try to lead them astray. Let's try to send out our women. Let's try to do this and turn them away from their God, because then they can be with us and we can turn it. And so we see them, and this is kind of it's like the golden calf being played out again. And so one of the things that is important for us to remember, that most of these ancient rituals in the pagan world at this time involved sex in some way. And if we think about this makes sense, because when you're trying to tie the cycle of the seasons and the growth of plants, you're also going to tie that to the sexual act, which again brings about new life. So connecting life and the sexual act is a natural one, but we'll see how they kind of turn this into this kind of perverted thing. As that's why whenever we hear, worshiping of a god, another god, it's not just like they're going to the church and being good things and they're just happening to say it to a different god. No, it involves usually something terrible. So we'll have, the worship of Amalek requires the burning alive of your own children. That's the immolation. And that's like a terrible, so obviously that's a bad thing. So a lot of them have these cult prostitutes will develop into prostitution. This was in Greece and things like that. And so you can see that worship of another god, idolatry, isn't just, going to a different church. No, it also takes in these other bad things which corrupt and lead astray. And so it's not. And when we see this case, so when he's bringing the Midianite into the tent, at that section where you have, Zimri bringing that in, it's implied that he's actually might be even bringing her into the tabernacle itself, the holy tent. So this is not only an act of adultery, it's also an act of sacrilege. And so this is like a grave kind of insult, because if you think about it, it's not only defiling yourself and your wedding bed and your vows, but you're also doing it in this holy place. You're not going away and doing it, you're bringing the sin into the holy place. So it's kind of like, back in the day when you had sanctuaries in church, it's because you're not supposed to do something bad in church. It's especially wrong if you do something bad in church. And so it's that kind of idea. So again, Phineas's actions seem a little bit more justified from our modern sensibilities. We don't like to be as violent, and that's understandable, but you can see how the reaction is much more justified in these circumstances. This isn't just an affair. This isn't just idolatry. This is a grave insult to everything that is Israel. And so that's why it demands this severe reaction. This is a betrayal on the highest level in multiple ways. So we'll see Phineas, and he will, without hesitation, stands up. And so again, compare this to the golden calf, where they had sexual misconduct and idolatry, but Moses had to come down. So again, we see them mess up, but I think there's also a little bit of hope because some react well. So they fall, but they have a better reaction. We also see, just like in the rebellion of Korah, it's the Levites, it's the priesthoods, who is taking the first step and leading the people in a good direction. That they're the ones who are now leading them and doing it in a good and holy way. Okay. The next we have the census, and this is the census of the new generation. So this is to mark out the kind of compared to the beginning. So at the beginning we had the first generation, now we have the new generation. And the numbers have increased, I forget what the exact numbers are of the increase, but they have increased even during this time of trial and exile, they have increased. One interesting note, I just read this, was there's a question of the numbers. So if you add up all the numbers, it's like 600,000 soldiers, and they specifically say this doesn't include the women and the men not of fighting age. So the fighting age is usually like 20 to 60. So the implication is there's probably 3 or 4 or even more people besides that. And so the estimates of the numbers from what it seems to be like 2 to 3 million. And that seems too many because all of Egypt at the time is probably only 2 to 3 million people. All of Canaan at the time is probably less than 1 million people. And so this seems like too many. Some people take a strict on, no, this is definitely the exact number, and that's fine. And you can have that interpretation, that's fine. But I just read an interesting one that the word for 1,000 was also used as a word for unit. So it's kind of like a baker's dozen, where if you said, you can say, I got a couple of these things. And a couple has a strict number definition, 2. But if you said, I got a couple of things, and you had 3 or 4, no one would bat an eye. So it's one of those words where it might not have had the strict number definition that we associated with it today. And so numbers are kind of iffy, especially you have to think back in the day too, this is not entirely, but the vast majority of people are illiterate. You don't have the same kind of counting systems you have today. So to be able to count these high numbers would be a feat in and of itself. And so it's like, so numbers are always a little bit more squishy than we think of them today. We tend to think of very scientific numbers. If you say 3,248, you mean 3,248. Where if they say, even how, like again, they're translating it, they might say like 3 units of this plus this plus this. And so the translation of this might not convey the nuance. And so if the term does mean unit, if that is a better translation, which I tend to like this, then it means instead of 600,000, there would be 600 units. And how many is in a unit? Well, we don't know, but we can estimate, and there's been different estimations on that. So the high end is 2 to 3 million for all people. The low end, if you take it as unit and you kind of guess what that is like 5 to 20,000. So how many were there actually? I don't know. But probably somewhere not at either extreme, probably somewhere. Yeah, so was there actually probably 2 to 3 million? Personally, again, personal interpretation, I would guess not. And I like the idea that it's representing something more, because they're more concerned about the representation of the growth than the actual specific people. And on the flip side of that, is it this none people, or are they just lying? No, they're not lying either. It's not just hyperbolic. It's meant to be symbolic. And so they would understand that too. This is kind of like, again, that Moses with the horns kind of thing, where it can mean more than one thing, and our language doesn't always catch that up with that. Okay. But we're not going to read all those numbers because it's just a long list of numbers. Okay. We're going to go to 27. When the daughters of Zelophehad had come forward, Zelophehad was son of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, a member of the Massonite clans. The names of his daughters were, we're not going to go through all those. They stood before Moses, Eleazar, the priest, and the leaders, and the congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among the company of those who gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died for his own sin, and he has no sons. Why should the name of our father be taken away from his clan because he has no son? Give to us a possession among our father's brothers." Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "The daughters of Zelophehad are right in what they are saying. You shall indeed let them possess an inheritance among their father's brothers, and pass the inheritance of their father on to them. You shall also say to the Israelites, if a man dies and has no son, then you shall pass his inheritance on to his daughter. If he has no daughters, you shall give his inheritance to his brother. If he has no brothers, you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, you shall give his inheritance to the nearest kinsman of his clan, and he shall possess it. It shall be for the Israelites a statute and ordinance as the Lord commanded Moses." So this is an interesting case because this would be relatively unheard of in most of the ancient world, of having women having any sort of rights. Now this is far from being, again, modern equal rights, perfect 50-50, all that kind of stuff we kind of think of equal rights as today. But the fact that they get to claim an ancestral right is a big deal, because in most interpretations, in most cultures, they would be part of the inheritance. They would be seen as property. So the fact that they're seeing them as more, and we've seen this in other of the rules. Are the rules always 100% fair? No. Even Jesus says that when he calls out divorce. That was done for the hardness of your hearts. But it does show you that they're different. And to the point where actually you'll see this even in modern Judaism. To my understanding, in many modern Judaism, they actually chase the Judaism through the mother. So if your mother is Jewish, you count as Jewish. And it's an interesting case because, of course, it's always the mix of not just religion but heredity. So it's just an interesting case of seeing that relationship between men and women and how it is unique. It is unique in the ancient world about how Jews treat their women, the Hebrews treat women in their world. The Lord said to Moses, "Go up this mountain to the Abraham range and see the land I have given to the Israelites. When you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people as your brother Aaron was, because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin. When the congregation quarreled with me, you did not show my holiness before their eyes at the waters. These were the waters of Meribah, Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin. Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint someone over the congregation who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord may not be like sheep without a shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand upon him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. You shall give him some of your authority, so that all the congregation of the Israelite may obey. But he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the decision of the Urim, and before the Lord. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all of Israel with him, the whole congregation. So Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole congregation. He laid his hands on him and commissioned him. The Lord had directed through Moses. So we're seeing again that passing from the first generation to the next generation, and we're seeing that who's going to lead Israel. And it's kind of interesting that it's not now. We've seen Joshua keep popping up, so it makes more sense from us. But from their perspective, it might seem kind of odd that it's not one of Moses' sons, it's not one of Aaron's sons, that it's this kind of assistant to Moses who's been his at his beck and call and has been helping him. One of the most interesting things, and this is more interesting when you read the book of Joshua, is that Joshua and Jesus are the same names. So this is one of those cases where we lose this connection in our modern translation, because this is translated from Hebrew, whereas Jesus, our modern term from Jesus, comes from the Greek translation from Yeshua, but it's the same name. So it's interesting that of all the people, Jesus isn't named Moses or anything, he's named Yeshua, because it's the people that Joshua is the one who will lead them into the promised land. And there's also some symbolic nature of, while he's not his direct son, it is the one sent. It's not, with Moses is more of the father figure, well, Joshua is more of the son figure. And so it's the one who will actually enter into the Holy Land. It's the one who will actually conquer it and establish the kingdom. Of course, it won't be a kingdom initially, but he'll establish the house of Israel in the Holy Land. And then what does Jesus do? He establishes his kingdom in the next world, the true Israel, the true Jerusalem, which is heaven. And so it's important for us, especially as Christians, that, we link all the ancient Israels would have directly connected, and all of the early Christians would have directly connected Joshua and Jesus, because it's that same name. So it's an important for us that sometimes we lose. Okay, the next is they're kind of going back into how they're celebrating and how they're living in this world. And but we are going to skip all those ones, because it's again just more thematic stuff, and it's good stuff, but we're gonna go over it. Starting in 31, we see kind of what's going to be the beginning of the rest of the stories. So we'll see first they have a war with Midian, and they return from the war, and then they have these things. So Midian is on the far side of the Jordan, so it's not exactly the promised land. There's a big divide in geography is very important in the minds of Israel, and so there's the difference between Transjordan, across the Jordan, and on the other side. So one side is Israel, the other side, actually for a long time Israelites will live there, but it's not as seen as that same one. So, but they're beginning to. So they conquer Midian, they conquer Bashan, and they conquer these things, but they're on the other side. And so in chapter 32, we'll see them conquer and divide up Transjordan. And so this is going to be an interesting case. I'm gonna read 32, but I'm probably gonna skip around through it. So now the Reubenites and the Gadites owned a very great number of cattle. When they saw that the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead was a good place for cattle, the Gadites and the Reubenites came and spoke to Moses, to Eleazar and the priest, and to the leader of the congregation, saying, At Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrod, and a bunch of other names, the land of the Lord subdued before the congregation of Israel is a land for cattle, and your servants have cattle. They continued, If we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not make us cross the Jordan. But Moses said to the Gadites and the Reubenites, Shall your brothers go to war while you sit here? Why will you discourage the hearts of the Israelites from going over into the land that the Lord has given them? Your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barneah to see the land. When they went up to the Wadi Ashol and saw the land, they discouraged the hearts of the Israelites from going into the land that the Lord has given them. The Lord's anger was kindled on the day, and he swore, saying, Surely none of the people who came up before out of Egypt for 20 years old and upwards shall see the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not unreservedly followed me. None except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and we're going to have more names. And the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness. Skipping down to 16. Then they came up to him and said, We will build sheepfolds here for our flocks, and towns for our little ones. But we will take up arms as a vanguard before the Israelites until we have brought them to their place. Meanwhile, our little ones will stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until all the Israelites have obtained their inheritance. We will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance has come to us on this side of the Jordan to the east. Okay, so what's going on is the Reubenites, the Gadites, and Manasseh, so remember that Joshua has two half-tribes, Manasseh and Issachar, want to stay on this side. And the first thing they say is, we have lots of cattle. Now, do you remember what we talked about cattle? That cattle is a symbol of the other world. It's a symbol of Egypt. So if they have lots of cattle, they're not going to be in the same land. So they're already that there's kind of this cultural divide, because there's a cultural divide between sheep and cattle. And it's interesting that it's Reuben too, because Reuben is always kind of the outside one, because Reuben is the oldest of all the sons. And like in the story with Joshua, he's the one who first proposes, but he's never the one that is given leadership in the way you'd expect. And so he's kind of disinherited, not completely, but the scepter goes to Judah, and Judah will be the powerful one. So you'll see the two ones that come out of it are more Joseph and Judah. And so it's setting up this kind of division that will play out later on. We'll see this later there will be actually a literal divide between the Israelites on either side of the Jordan, to the point where they'll start speaking differently. And they have this thing where they're in a civil war, and they're like, okay, if they pronounce this word like this, kill them, because that means they're from the other side. And so there's a reason why God wants them all on one side of the river, because he wants them to complete the conquest. He doesn't want them to be outside or just merely attached. He wants them to fully be. And that's even symbolic for the fact that now Manasseh and Issachar, the two half-tribes, are going to be separated, physically separated from one side of the Jordan to the other. So this is not a good thing. It's not the worst thing, because Moses says they end up kind of coming up with a compromise that makes it work. They said, we will still fight. We're not going to be cowards. We'll still fight. We'll be the vanguard. So we'll fight first in the lines and to conquer the Holy Land for the people. But there is this kind of tension, and this will kind of play out as the tension, even though it's not exactly the same lands, that we'll eventually see between Israel and Judah, when Israel and Judah split in the time after David and the time after Solomon. So again, God is always calling them to be one, but we're going to see that the cracks are already there, the divisions are already there, and unfortunately these cracks will return. And so it's that kind of stuff. So, and we see that all in the symbolic of the cows, and we see symbolic in being on the other side of the Jordan. And so it does also show, though, that God will kind of work with us. Fine, you won't go all the way, okay, well, we'll make this work. It's not the full inheritance, but we'll give it. And so God will work with our plans even when we are not ready to fully commit. Okay, fine, well, you can do it. And so they work it out, but it's definitely not the ideal. So it's that idea is with that. So the Gadites, the Reubenites, and Manasseh promise that they will fight with them, and that kind of appeases them, but it's still not seen as a good thing. Okay, then we have kind of a summary on 33 of what happened, and you'll see this again happen frequently, that they'll constantly retelling the story, and for us, that's a reminder that we're in the middle of Holy Week. Why are we in Holy Week? Because we're retelling the same story over and over again, and even in their writings, they retell the story over and over again, because it's don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. This is what's important. This is why we do this year after year. It's why you do the Passover year after year. It's why we have Holy Week year after year. It's to remember to be living in that moment, because we are not, it's so easy to forget. It's so easy to go astray. It's so easy to find a new idol to worship. It's so easy to do these things. If you're constantly in that state of reminder of what God has done for you, where he has brought you, how you need to be traveling, how you need to be moving through your life, well, then it's because of our weakness. It's not because of God. The jealousy of God is the jealousy of, again, a parent wanting to protect their child, that is jealous when their kid is in trouble and wanting them to be safe, and so that kind of thing. Okay. So from the final stages is going to outline the conquest. So we have then the boundaries of the land. Is this worth reading? Yeah, because it kind of reminds us what I just said. So God is going to outline what is going to be the Holy Land for them. And this has changed over time. In fact, the initial promise was a much wider swath, and each time they messed up, it kept on getting condensed in and in and in. So now it's their smaller section because they weren't able to fulfill the covenant to the level that God had initially given them. So it's kind of like sainthood, If you can do all these things, you can be this great and saint. And then we mess up. I'm like, okay, you can still be good. Okay, you can still be good. But every time it kind of shrinks us a little bit. So their initial promise has shrunk, not because of God, but because of themselves. When you enter the land of Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you for your inheritance, the land of Canaan, defined by its boundaries. Your south sector shall extend from the wilderness of Zin along the side of Edom. So remember, they tried to go through Edom, so this is down by the Dead Sea, so it's like that shall go down to there. Your southern border shall begin from the end of the Dead Sea. On the east, your boundaries shall turn south to the ascents of Akrabbim and cross to Zin. And its outer limits shall be south of Kadesh Barium, and it shall go on to Hazar Adar and cross Azmon. The boundary shall turn from Azmon to the Wadi of Egypt, and its termination shall be at the sea. So you'll see sometimes it'll be the Salt Sea or the Great Sea, and this is obviously the Mediterranean Sea. So he's kind of defining their path, and it's not a coincidence that this is there. These are natural borders because you have a desert on the south, you have mountains in the Dead Sea and the Jordan to your east, and then you have the highlands to the north, which is modern-day Lebanon. So these are natural borders that he's giving them. For your western boundary, you shall have the Great Sea and its coast. This shall be your western boundary. This shall be your northern boundary. From the Great Sea you shall mark out your line to Mount Hor. from Mount Hor. You shall mark it out to Lebo Hamath. You can hear Lebanon in that. You know, these are ancient places. These are old names, and they go back a long time. So you'll even see like Assyria and Syria is the same thing. So these go back. The outer limit of its boundary shall be Zedad. Then the boundary shall extend to Ziphron, and its end shall be Hazar-Aman. This shall be your northern border. You shall mark out your eastern border from Hazar-Aman to Sephram, and the boundary shall continue down from Sephram to Ribut on the east side of Ain, and the boundary shall go down and reach the eastern slope of the Sea of Chinneroth. I think that's the Sea of Galilee. If I remember correctly, that's the Sea of Galilee. And the boundary shall go down to the Jordan, and to its end shall be the Dead Sea. Yeah, that has to be the Sea of Galilee. This shall be your land. So it's funny that even though the other ones have compromised and said we're going to stay on this side, God does not mark that as part of the covenant land. So he marks it as this. So it's the desert to the south, the mountains, the highlands of Lebanon to the north, the coast to the west, and Jordan to the east. And so the Dead Sea it's called dead because it's super, super salty, because it doesn't have a terminus. Most rivers end up in the ocean. It doesn't. And so it goes from the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan, which are freshwater and are fed by the mountains of Lebanon, and then it ends in the middle of this Dead Sea. And so that's where, even today, that's pretty much modern Israel. Modern Israel's borders go farther south, down to closer to Egypt, and have more of that. But it is funny how these regions, again, it's funny that Egypt is still Egypt, Lebanon is still Lebanon, Syria is still Syria, and a lot of this is defined by geography. Geography defines a lot about your culture, it defines a lot about how you're going to be, and so God's trying to let them be this people in this land. And it is a good land. It's one of the areas that's had civilization for thousands of years, one of those centered areas. Okay. So we're going to stop there. So, okay, and then 35, I'm not going to read all this, but he gives them the land of the Levites, and this is setting up. So each clan is going to kind of claim their own little section, each tribe, and they're going to have their own little territories. So Israel was not a state in the modern sense. It was a collection of regions, and so they're still, even though they're considering themselves one people, it's still, it's kind of like how in Youngstown, when all the people were coming up, there was a West Hungarian church and an East Hungarian church, and they didn't always like each other. And it's kind of like that. So it's one of those things like, okay, we're still Israel, but we still have these internal divisions, and those internal divisions will stay. And the biggest one will be between Judah, because Judah will take a larger portion of the land just because they do, and they're larger. And then that'll eventually lead to the division between Israel and Judah as the other one. So Judah becomes almost as big as the rest of the others combined. The Levites are special, though. They have cities, and when they say city, this is town at best. These are not big cities. These are Rootstown, like downtown Rootstown, which is just Neomed, would be a city. Like this is towns. They get to live intermixed. They don't have a set territory. They live intermixed throughout the territories because they're the priesthood tribe. So they live out throughout them, so they don't have the normal one. But it's funny because even though they have this one tribe who lives intermixed, because again, you have the two half-tribes of Issachar and Manasseh, you still have 12 tribes. And this is the interesting one too, because this still plays out in our own culture, because you have the 12 apostles, and you have the two half-apostles, which are Paul and, what's his name? Begins with an M, and now I can't think of it. Who they appoint as the other, oh my gosh. I can't think of his name. You guys know who I'm talking about, the other apostle. Who can think of it? What? Yeah. Matthias, yes. I don't know why, Matthias. I couldn't think of his name. Matthias. So you have two half-apostles, Matthias and Paul, to the point where, whenever they have something with, they're doing all 12 apostles, like it's on the windows or something, it's always like, are they going to do Matthias or are they going to do Paul? Because it's a debate on which one you count. And so it's, again, if you want to do the 12 tribes, they have the two half-tribes. And this is interesting, too, because, again, in the same way that Judah becomes the chief one, We still have, in the early church, you didn't just have the Pope, you had the Pope and these other sees where the apostles were founded, and some of those still exist, like Alexandria, which is that's St. Mark's. St. Mark's seat was in Alexandria, and so it had this special thing. And we still have, in the church, we have the Roman Catholic Church, but we have all these other little churches. But the Roman Catholic Church is the biggest within the larger Catholic Church. So it's kind of funny how that plays out in the same way, that the chair of Peter will become the largest, just like Judah will become the largest, even though these other ones will survive in some forms or another. So just interesting little parallels. Okay, that kind of ends that there, and we're going to end there because that seems like a good spot. My plan is to continue doing these, so I'm just going to keep doing them at least through the summer. So as long as we're doing the evening mass, I'm just going to keep doing it because I enjoy it and it's fun. So if you'd like to keep coming, please feel free to keep coming. And if not, we'll record it and you can watch it, or you can just not do anything. It's fine. It's up to you guys. Hopefully you guys have gotten something out of this. Hopefully this was rewarding. But my plan is to keep on doing this because I just like it. This is my fun stuff. So let's end in prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, thank you for bringing us here together. Thank you for this opportunity to grow closer to you through the study of your scripture, through the study of your word. And your word is Christ. And we pray in the words he taught us, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. St. Peter, Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Yeah, so next week I'll probably go either into Deuteronomy and Leviticus, and then I'll finish up Joshua, and then we'll probably backtrack and do Genesis. But we'll see. We're just gonna kind of freewheel it and see how it goes, and we'll just keep going as long as people keep showing up and watching the videos. I'll keep doing it. Have a good night, everybody.